Now let's head outside, where scent drifts more freely, on the breeze between date palms, through bustling market stalls, around temple courtyards and city streets. In ancient Egypt, perfume wasn't confined to private chambers or sacred spaces. It was also very much a public experience. And if you had a nose, you were going to use it. Imagine this: you're walking through the central marketplace of Memphis around midday. The sun is bright, the crowd is humming, and every few steps you pass a new aroma.
A vendor with basket of mint and thyme ou au vert.
Downwind, the butcher's stall mingles less pleasantly with a nearby pile of onions. But then, sweet relief, you pass a perfumer's table.
Jar of ambergris and lotus oil glint in the light, and your whole mood shift. You take a deep breath and keep walking.
It's not quite a spa day, but close enough. Perfume sellers were fixtures of urban life. Some had permanent stalls, while others wandered with baskets or carts, calling out their blends. Fragrant resin for tired feet, jasmine for the linen chest. And though some sold imported luxuries at royal prices, many catered to ordinary folks: single-note oils, diluted resins, herbal waters. The scent economy was stratified but surprisingly accessible. Historians still argue whether these street blends were officially regulated or just left to the whims of entrepreneurial noses. Some texts suggest perfumers were part of temple guilds or trade collectives, but there's also plenty of evidence that local sellers mixed their own recipes and gave them snappy names, sort of the ancient equivalent of midnight amber blossom or ocean breeze for men. You could get scented trinkets too. Small beads carved from scented woods, or woven pouches filled with fragrant herbs to wear on cords around the neck. Children sometimes wore them for protection, adults for fashion, or maybe both. Who says amulets can't smell like rose oil? Temples also had public scent rituals. On certain festival days, clouds of incense would billow into the streets, wafting sandalwood and frankincense across the city. Even if you weren't inside the temple, you still got a dose of that sacred aroma, like a holy pop-up diffuser. This was intentional. Scent was part of spectacle. A way for the divine to leak into daily life. And let's not ignore the flip side. Ancient Egypt had its share of public stenches. The Nile, as glorious as it was, had moods.
Summer it amplifiait every fish market, tannery, and un wash tarmpy in town.
And let's just say, not every animal sacrifice was swiftly cleaned up after. Perfume wasn't just a delight, it was defense. In fact, there's evidence that certain oils were kept on hand just to combat bad smells. One common blend, featuring spikenard and citrus peel, was nicknamed something like the nose saver. Whether it worked or just made everything smell like spicy lemons, we may never know. One fringe theory, largely based on a few scattered inscriptions, suggests that some government buildings were regularly scented as part of their maintenance. Can you imagine walking into the tax office and thinking, patchouli today? Must be budget season. Sadly, this remains unconfirmed. Then there's the Nile cruise industry. Yes, they had one. Wealthy Egyptians often took leisurely boat rides for festivals or simple pleasure, and these floating picnics came scented. Flower garlands hung from the canopy, guests were perfumed before boarding, and the deck cushions might have been sprinkled with rosewater. Because nothing ruins a relaxing river journey like the smell of sweaty reeds. Even funerals had scent elements that extended into public view. As funeral processions made their way through town, mourners would carry bundles of myrrh and incense, both to honor the dead and to keep the living from passing out in the sun. A very thoughtful gesture. And every now and then, scent became protest. One recorded incident mentions a disgruntled temple worker throwing a bitter oil onto the floor of a sacred hall, not enough to damage anything, but definitely enough to stink up the joint. Scholars debate whether this was symbolic defiance or just someone being petty with a bottle of castor oil. But overwhelmingly, perfume in public life was about pleasure and identity. The scent you wore in the street said something about who you were, or wanted to be. A tradesman with fresh cedar oil might be showing pride in his craft.
A priest with floral note might signal spiritual devotion, or a side business in love charm.
And for those who could afford it, public festivals were an olfactory buffet. You'd smell spices roasting at food stalls, incense rising from makeshift shrines, and perfume oils gifted in tiny jars as part of ceremonial offerings. Some festivals were said to be so fragrant, the gods stayed longer. Which is either poetic metaphor or a fantastic tourism slogan. So tonight, as you picture those long-lost streets, those vendor cries, those drifting clouds of scented smoke, imagine how alive it all was. Not just noisy or colorful, but fragrant in ways modern cities rarely are.
With every step, your senses tired.
And maybe tomorrow, when you step outside and catch a hint of jasmine or sandalwood from somewhere, you'll remember, thousands of years ago, someone else caught that same note on the wind, paused, smiled, and kept walking. Now let's step into the shadowy realm of love spells, beauty secrets, and the kind of whispered recipes passed between friends under fig trees. Because perfume wasn't just for ceremony or cleanliness, it played a starring role in romance, mystique, and seduction. In ancient Egypt, scent was how you flirted, without saying a word. You've bathed in lotus water, slipped into freshly scented linen, and now you're applying a thin veil of oil behind your ears. The blend? Blue lotus for euphoria, cinnamon bark for heat, and just a hint of honeyed resin. You're not going to a festival or a temple, you're heading out to bump into someone by accident.
Classic move.
Perfume was intrinsic to ancient beauty routines. Women, and men, used fragrant oils not just for their aroma, but for their glow. Skin moisturized with scented unguents shimmered in the sun. Hair infused with myrrh gave off a warm sweetness every time you moved. And eyes ringed in kohl? Even better when the whole effect was wrapped in a veil of soft almond and cardamom. Cosmetic palettes have been found with tiny wells for scented ointments. Historians still argue whether these were mass-produced blends or one-of-a-kind concoctions handed down like family secrets. Either way, if Cleopatra had a beauty fridge, it was probably full of bespoke oils, and maybe one very smug cat. Romantic perfumes were often tied to specific flowers.
Blue lotus, again and again, Turnepin love pétrienne visual article.
It was associated with both sensual pleasure and dreamlike calm. One surviving line from a lover's song reads, "She has placed blue lotus in her hair, and now I am undone." Subtle? No. Effective? Extremely. Another beloved note was Kifi, the already mentioned incense blend. While often burned in temples, a diluted version could be worn as personal perfume. With its warm, spiced sweetness, it carried connotations of nighttime, relaxation, and more than a little allure. Think, ancient Egyptian date night cologne. And then we have the love charms, ritualistic recipes said to stir desire, fidelity, or even obsession. One fringe papyrus describes a paste made from wine-soaked myrrh, crushed rose petals, and a few eyebrow-raising additions, fingernail powder, anyone. Rubbed onto the wrist, it was said to make your beloved follow you like a cat after fish. No word on long-term results. Scent also played a role in marriage rituals. Brides were anointed with symbolic oils, often myrrh or frankincense, chosen for their purifying and protective properties. Some had ceremonial scent cones placed on their heads, melting slowly as the celebration continued, releasing fragrance throughout the evening. Romantic, a little messy, and delightfully impractical. You try dancing with a waxy hat on. One lesser-known custom involved leaving scented tokens. A carved ivory box filled with fragrant resin might be slipped to a lover as a parting gift. Or a ribbon of perfumed linen tied discreetly around the wrist, a sensory reminder that lingered long after your crush had left the room. And it wasn't all serious passion and ritual. Ancient Egyptians had a playful side. Some love poems describe girls scenting their pets with flowers to attract attention, or dabbing perfume onto a clay doll representing their beloved and then placing it in the sun, so his heart burns for me. It's either magic or the original version of passive-aggressive texting. Perfume could also be part of reconciliation. A husband returns from a trip, and instead of words, his wife greets him with his favorite oil and a linen cloth warmed in the sun. No shouting, just sandalwood. There's a lesson in there for all of us. Historians still puzzle over how personal perfumes were stored. Some alabaster jars were elaborately carved, suggesting they were intended to be displayed. Others were small and discreet, tucked into a sash or hanging from a belt. Did people have signature scents? Was there pressure to follow trends? The written record stays frustratingly vague, but it's fun to imagine that one neighbor was always known as the one who overdoes the clove oil. And yes, scent could betray you. An ancient tale tells of a young woman caught sneaking home at dawn because her perfume lingered too loudly. Her parents? Less than impressed. It's the original walk of shame, just more resinous. Fragrance also factored into fertility beliefs. Certain oils, especially those involving anise or dill, were thought to increase the chances of conception. Some were worn daily, Others applied during specific lunar phases. Did it work?
Hard to say.
But when you're hoping for a child, every little ritual helps, and smells nice too. And just when you thought it couldn't get more intimate, some couples perfumed their bedsheets with blends intended to soften dreams. Recipes for sleep oils included lavender, marjoram, and crushed poppy. Whether these were for relaxation or more extracurricular activities is open to interpretation. But the bedtime ambience was deliberate. So tonight, as you tuck yourself in, imagine that same soft layering of scent, on the skin, in the sheets, in the breath between two people leaning closer in the glow of a flickering oil lamp. Romance was never just a look or a line. It was an atmosphere. And in ancient Egypt, perfume set the scene long before the first word was spoken. Let's step now into the place where the olfactory world met the afterlife. Because in ancient Egypt, the scents you wore didn't stop at death. In fact, they only got stronger. This was the grand finale of Perfume's journey, when oils, incense, and fragrant resins took on their most sacred and powerful roles.
Urinadim, cool chamber, farbelot the desertecite.
Stone walls echo faintly with whispered prayers, and the air smells thick, like frankincense, cedar oil, and something both sweet and ancient. A body lies on a low table, carefully wrapped in linen. This is not just mourning, it's a scented performance. Mummification was as much about aroma as it was about preservation. The goal? To keep the body intact, yes, but also to cleanse it, elevate it, and prepare it to be recognized by the gods. Scent, in this case, was a form of divine ID. You probably know that natron, a salty, absorbent mineral, was used to dehydrate the body. But fewer people realize that after this, the body was massaged with fragrant oils. Lots of them. Myrrh, cedarwood, lotus oil, and a host of others. These weren't just antiseptics, though they helped. They were spiritual tools. You weren't just keeping decay at bay.
You were preparing a soul for eternity.
Historians still argue whether these oils followed strict recipes or varied based on social status. We know royal mummies often got the good stuff, blends with imported resins and rare oils, but even middle-class burials included fragrant elements. A modest budget might only allow for a single oil, like juniper, but the gesture was there, sent as farewell and as hope. Ancient texts describe the body being reassembled with sweetness, as if aroma were part of the soul's glue. And once wrapped, the linen itself was often soaked in perfumed substances. One royal mummy was found with over 20 layers of resin-impregnated linen. Imagine being bundled in 1,000 years' worth of incense. If you didn't make it to the afterlife, at least you smelled phenomenal.
Funeral rite extended dissolfactoritem.
Mourners might carry bundles of herbs or incense burners, trailing smoke as the procession moved through town. Some placed scented cones or wax flowers near the nose of the deceased, ensuring that their last memory, real or symbolic, was of earthly pleasures. There's even one fringe theory that perfumes were used to distract bad spirits. A particularly spicy blend could throw off any malevolent forces lingering near the tomb, kind of like spiritual bug spray. No guarantees, but hey, worth a try. Once inside the tomb, the scent story continued. Canopic jars, those ornate containers for organs, were often lined or filled with fragrant substances to mask odor and preserve what's inside. And in the burial chamber itself, it wasn't uncommon to find entire jars of perfume left as offerings. In case you need a touch-up in the afterlife, you can almost hear someone say. But scent wasn't just physical. It was symbolic. Incense smoke rising during rituals represented the soul ascending. Oils anointing the body were metaphors for rebirth. A lotus-scented cloth placed at the feet of the dead? A promise that they'd walk through the field of reeds, Egypt's version of paradise, with grace. And while tomb robbers might have looted gold and jewels, they often left behind oils and incense. Not because they were worthless, but because these were sacred. To steal them was to risk a curse, or at least a lingering stench of guilt. One particular scroll, faded and fragmentary, speaks of a perfume of returning, meant to call back a wandering spirit who had lost its way. The recipe is frustratingly incomplete, listing only river mint, root of dusk, and a drop of lion's sleep. Scholars still debate what any of that means. But doesn't it sound like the kind of scent you'd follow out of a dream? Some burial perfumes were so potent, their residue still lingers on ancient artifacts. One 3,000-year-old bottle, cracked but sealed in a museum drawer, released a puff of something floral when opened, a tiny time capsule of scent from a world long gone. And yes, Some pharaohs had bespoke burial perfumes. Ramses II, ever the dramatic one, was found with a particular resin blend likely imported from far beyond Egypt's borders.
The message? Even in death, he commands the best.
Respect. For average people, the practice might have been simpler, but no less heartfelt. A small sachet of herbs tucked into the wrappings. A dab of lotus oil pressed onto the brow. A favorite scent poured into a clay jar, sealed with beeswax, and placed near the feet. These were gestures of memory, of love, and of continuity. The idea that scent could guide you home. So as you lie here tonight, wrapped in your own blankets instead of layers of resinous linen, think about this. Long before modern embalming, long before store-bought perfumes, humans believed that smell could link the living and the dead. That scent could be memory. Could be prayer. Could be a whisper that says, "You mattered." And maybe they were right. Tonight, we ease back into the world above ground, but we're not quite done. We're heading now into the bustling aromatic web of trade, science, and empire building, because perfume in ancient Egypt didn't stay put. It traveled, across rivers, deserts, oceans, and centuries. You're at a river port near Thebes. The sun's not even up yet, but already the dock buzzes with life. Reed boats bob in the morning current, baskets of goods clatter onto ramps, and somewhere in the chaos, a merchant is shouting about the new batch of cinnamon bark, straight from Punt. You catch a waft of something warm, spiced, and resinous. It's perfume, and it's more valuable than gold. Egypt didn't just use perfumes, it exported them, refined them, and guarded their recipes like state secrets. They had a reputation. If your kingdom wanted to impress a visiting dignitary, you sent them Egyptian oils. Not bronze. Not grain. Scent. This meant that the making of perfume wasn't just the work of temple priests or village artisans. It was an industry. There were production centers, storage houses, and shipping ports devoted to scent. Historians still debate just how centralized this trade was, but the evidence points to a kind of proto-corporate structure. The pharaoh's court controlled the finest blends, but regional markets had their own recipes too. Punt, often referred to as the land of the gods, was one of Egypt's biggest fragrance partners. Though its exact location is still debated, it likely lay along the Red Sea coast, possibly in what's now Eritrea or Somalia. Ships returned from Punt heavy with frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and exotic woods. These weren't just luxury items, they were cultural necessities. Religious rituals, medicine, seduction, they all needed scent. And the smells didn't stop in Egypt. Once bottled or sealed in alabaster jars, Egyptian perfumes traveled to Nubia,
to Mesopotamia,
eventually to the Greek world. Traders prized these oils, sometimes rebottling them under local labels but rarely changing the recipes. One Greek papyrus even admits, grudgingly, that the best oil is still the Egyptian one.
Ancien brand loyalty.
Absolutely. The bottles themselves became part of the appeal. Carved alabaster, painted faience, delicate glass. Containers so beautiful they were often buried with their owners, even after the perfume was long gone. One Roman noblewoman famously had her servants rub a bit of Egyptian oil on her letters, so her correspondents could smell her mood. We call that passive-aggressive chic. And of course, this popularity sparked imitation. Other cultures started producing Egyptian-style oils. Some used the same ingredients, others substituted cheaper fillers. One Babylonian tablet complains that the perfumed jars smell of onions by morning. Oof. As demand grew, Egypt had to get creative. Certain plants were hard to grow in bulk near the Nile, especially if they were high-maintenance divas like cinnamon trees. So Egyptians experimented. They imported raw ingredients and perfected extraction methods. They made oils stretch farther with base blends and preserved freshness with clever sealing techniques. There's even a fringe theory that some recipes used honey as a fixative, not for sweetness, but for stability. And while most of this was strictly business, there were moments of cultural exchange. Foreign dignitaries visiting Egypt would be anointed with sacred oils during rituals, sometimes whether they wanted to be or not. One Syrian ambassador reportedly asked for the name of a blend he'd been given during a pharaoh's feast. When told it translated roughly to the Sigh of Hathor, he just nodded and said, "I'll take 3 bottles." Perfume became a kind of soft power. Egypt didn't need to conquer you to impress you, it could seduce your nose. And once you smelled what the priests were burning, or what the dancers wore during the Opet festival, well, your homeland's goat fat ointment probably didn't hit the same. Back in Egypt, perfume was so important to trade that taxes were sometimes paid in oils. Scribes tracked these transactions obsessively. 15 amphorae of scented nard. Received intact. Smelled by clerk. Somewhere in the margins, you can imagine someone adding, "And yes, I took a little home." The most luxurious perfumes, of course, went to the top. Royal palaces had entire storage rooms devoted to jars of incense, resin, and oils. Some pharaohs were buried with inventories that read like the world's fanciest bathroom shelf. 3 jars, lotus.
Four, cedarwood.
1. Experimental blend, not for public use. Cleopatra, always ahead of the curve, reportedly had a custom perfume barge. It said the sails of her ship were soaked in rose and cardamom oil so powerful that Julius Caesar smelled her before he saw her. And as Egypt's influence spread, so too did the belief that scent could define a person's legacy. To smell like Egypt was to smell of power, mystery, and allure. Even today, some modern perfumes still nod to these ancient roots, using lotus, myrrh, and amber in tribute. So tonight, as trade winds rustle through your dreams, think of those reed boats gliding down the Nile. Of port cities thick with cinnamon and sandalwood. Of glass jars sealed with wax and tucked carefully into crates bound for unknown shores. Scent was Egypt's gift to the world, and the world, quite literally, couldn't get enough. As the days wind down, let's return home to the everyday quiet where ancient Egyptian perfumes quietly worked their magic. It wasn't all royal rituals and bustling ports. There were small, intimate moments where fragrance shaped daily life in ways you might not expect.
Picture yourself strolling through a marketplace in Thebes, the sun dipping low and casting no shadow over stall.
You pass a vendor selling fine linen, but your nose catches something else, a small jar of rose-scented oil, nestled between baskets of figs and clay pots. The vendor smiles knowingly. This oil isn't just for smell, it's for soothing tired hands after a day of weaving, or softening skin hardened by work under the sun. Perfume was part of hygiene but also self-care. Baths weren't just about getting clean, they were sensory rituals. You might rub almond oil into your skin after washing, not just for moisture but to carry the scent of distant gardens throughout the day. Historians still argue how often the average person bathed, despite the desert heat, but everyone agreed on the pleasure of a lightly scented body. And it wasn't just the rich who indulged. Archaeologists have found small broken perfume bottles in humble homes, proof that scent wasn't a luxury, but a daily comfort. Maybe a mother dabbed a little jasmine oil on her child's hair before bedtime, hoping it would chase away bad dreams. Remember the cones of perfumed wax worn on the heads of nobles? Well, everyday folk had their own versions, small sachets of dried herbs and flowers tucked into clothing. These pockets of scent brightened long days in dusty streets or the laborious work of the fields. Perfume also helped in practical ways. Some blends were used to mask the smell of sweat or smoke in cramped homes. Others had antibacterial properties. Think of oils like juniper or coriander acting as ancient disinfectants. And don't underestimate the psychological boost. Smelling good helped keep spirits up, whether you were crafting pottery or teaching scribes. Cooking and perfume overlapped here too. Certain herbs, like cinnamon and coriander, flavored food and perfume alike. The kitchen and the perfumer's workshop were connected spaces, with the line between edible and aromatic blurring. It's no surprise that a good meal often ended with a faint scent of spices lingering in the air. You might also have noticed the role perfume played in social etiquette. Visitors to a home were greeted with a light anointing of oil, a silent welcome and sign of hospitality. Refusing this could be taken as a slight, so it was as much a social gesture as a fragrant one. Picture yourself sitting quietly in a courtyard, the scent of frankincense smoke curling from nearby lamps, your host offering a small vial to warm your hands. And here's a quirky tidbit: some perfumes were believed to enhance memory and focus. Scribes working late into the night might keep a small flask of rosemary or mint oil nearby. Modern studies support these claims, aromatherapy for ancient scholars, if you will. Gender roles around perfume were also fluid. While some oils were marketed more to women, like the soft rose or jasmine blends, men were equally invested in scent. Warriors anointed themselves before battle, priests used incense in ceremonies, and farmers rubbed cooling oils on their skin. Scent was universal. The decline of perfume's cultural dominance came slowly, as new empires rose and religious practices shifted. But even as Egypt's power waned, the legacy of its fragrant traditions spread across the Mediterranean and beyond. Egyptian scents influenced Greek, Roman, and later Islamic perfumery traditions, seeding an olfactory heritage that still blooms today.
And as you drift closer to sleep, imagine the last of the day swell, lotus, cedarwood, myrrh, softly settling around you.
Like a gentle whisper from a time long past, telling you that even in a world shaped by monumental stone and endless sun, it was the small fragrant details that connected people, memory, and spirit. Thank you for traveling through this scented journey with me.
Tomorrow, the world feel a little softer, a little more fragrant, just as ancient entended.
Now, a gentle wind down to close our story.
You lie back, the sounds of the night mingling softly with the scent of imagined lotus blossom and cedar.
The day's warmth fades, replaced by a calm that seeps slowly into your bones. Let the gentle memory of ancient oils wrap around you like a soft blanket, soothing, steadying, inviting dreams that drift like incense smoke. Feel your breath deepen, your body relax, as if you're bathed in the warm glow of a desert sunset, the air carrying whispers of distant temples and forgotten gardens. The past and present blend in this moment, quiet and fragrant, a space where history and sleep meet. No need to rush.
Just breathe. Let the soft linger.
Good night.